22 years ago, a Winston-Salem man named Nathaniel Jones died after an attack outside his home. Jones was the grandfather of NBA star Chris Paul. 5 teenagers were convicted in Jones' murder. However, appeals over evidence of their involvement and their innocence continue even today. This case is the subject of Delia D'Ambra's investigation for season 7 of her CounterClock podcast. In fact, if you search the name Nathaniel Jones into Google, her podcast about him comes up first. Delia, thank you so much for joining us here. You've been doing a lot of work on this case.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It is a beast of a case. I mean, you're, like you said, 22 years old and lots of post-conviction things. You had 2 trials in the early 2000s. And so, yeah, a lot of things have happened. And it's a story that I think maybe certain, if you're not of a certain generation, perhaps in the Forsyth County, Winston-Salem area, you might not know about it. And so the podcast has really been able to sort of revive that for people who knew about it then and to new audiences that are unaware of what the case and what really happened.
Now, during this, you interviewed Nathaniel Cawthon and Rayshawn Banner, and they're still convicted in connection with the death of Nathaniel Jones. So what was that conversation like with each of them?
Yeah, they are both still incarcerated, serving out their, life sentences, essentially. And yeah, I mean, I went to both of their prisons in North Carolina. They've been moved around throughout the years. And it was definitely interesting to, be there in a prison and interview someone in a podcast format. Because the audio is really, the driving force in this sort of medium. But to be able to have that face-to-face was very important for me as a journalist, because these are men who are continuing to claim their innocence. And so in order to really dig into the story and to be able to get all the perspectives, I think there's a lot of value in having that, face-to-face time, and thankfully that worked out with those 2 individuals. And it was good to meet both of them and to hear their stories from them firsthand.
There are things that you're getting for this that other journalists have not been able to get. And much of the evidence against the men who were convicted, it's now kind of falling to the wayside. And that includes a recanted testimony against them and the discovery of new DNA. So do these developments mean anything for possible freedom for these people?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's sort of wild in this whole thing is that throughout this production, right, so just in 2024, this year, all of those things you mentioned really kind of came to a head when a judge decided to rule that the individuals would have an evidentiary hearing in the post-conviction space in Forsyth County in January of 2025, which is just a few weeks away. And they're going to be presenting, the defense is going to be presenting a lot of those things you just talked about. And so, yeah, that's very real-time development of these innocence claims, and to see where the cases go and the potential for exoneration if that's what the courts decide.
Now, we mentioned this earlier, but Jones' grandson, NBA star Chris Paul, he has a perspective onto this. Does it play into the public view of this case at all?
Well, I think, Chris Paul's book that came out in 2023 is a beautiful memoir of his grandfather and his relationship with his grandfather. And he does discuss, briefly in it, the impact of this on the family, and also his perspective on the criminal justice system's handling of this case. And so that's really the only public, expression that we've seen. And I read the book cover to cover, like I said, an incredible memoir. But that's really, I think, the one time we saw that perspective, and we'll see what happens here in the coming weeks.
And just a reminder for people, where can they listen to your podcast exactly?
Yeah, you can listen on all podcast platforms. You can listen directly on the website, but a lot of people go to Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Delia D'Ambra, host of the CounterClock podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, Delia.
Thank you.